using potentially a 529 plan to help buy housing near campus in the university in which the children are attending. Specifically, what's actually allowed here can quietly turn into a liability exposure, and there are a lot of other considerations to take into account other than just tax strategy. And again, a lot of tax strategists will discuss the tax strategies behind it, but then now we're missing the asset protection, estate, and succession planning aspects. My name is Tyler Dahl. I am the principal attorney and founder of the Dahl Law Group, and we work with California business owners, and we serve as strategic planning counsel for business owners. We don't just draft documents, we look at business, tax structure, estate plan, and asset protection, among other practice areas in one connected system. And today I want to talk about a strategy that comes up pretty frequently, so let's get into it. Instead of paying dorm fees to a stranger or renting to a stranger near campus, you buy a house near the campus and university in which your child attends, and you have your kid pay rent to you with using 529 funds that you contributed to. So this way you can build equity instead of burning cash. Kind of the good old adage of, why rent when you can buy. So what does a 529 plan actually cover? The first thing would be qualified expenses. That includes tuition, books, supplies, certain tech, and of course, in that is room and board. For off-campus housing, the tax-free treatment is capped at the school's published cost of attendance housing allowance, not whatever the rent actually is. So for example, if you think the fair market rental value of the home is maybe $2,500 a month, for example, but the published cost of attendance housing limit, or housing allowance rather, that's for the university is $2,000. Well, 529 plan, you can only use $2,000 to pay the rent to you. Now, that allowance number usually needs to be pulled directly from the school's financial aid, and sometimes what's publicized isn't really accurate. You just need to do your due diligence and make sure you're finding what that published cost of attendance housing allowance is. Something else to consider is that this number changes too as well. This published number by the university is something that you'll need to check in on an annual basis. So there's a real core misunderstanding, I think, with this particular tax strategy. Strategy is not the 529 buying the home. It's covering the student's qualified housing expenses. And so the parents who own the property are still the landlord. It's the child plus other classmates or other individuals who are going to be the tenants. And it's the rental income that is coming into the parents that is still taxable income that the parents would need to pay taxes on, that you as the parent will need to pay tax on, even when the rent is literally the 529 money being paid. Now, if you follow us and you read our blogs, you'll find out that, of course, if you own a home, you have a depreciation deduction you get to take depreciating the home. And there are other strategies to deal with potential taxable income within real estate, such as a cost segregation study coupled with a real estate professional classification. Don't worry about the taxation on the home. It's usually something that is a very minimal tax, if any, depending on your specific tax bracket. So how is this strategy different for business owners? Well, business owners, we're used to structuring around tax efficiency, and this looks like just another optimization strategy and technique, but it's a different discipline. We're really talking about real estate plus personal taxes instead of business taxes. The same instinct that says put the house in an entity and get the depreciation and then capture the upside of the appreciation needs to be paired with liability and gift and income tax awareness that's pretty easy to skip over if you're not a business owner. Now, it's worth mentioning that for business owners who already have an umbrella liability policy or just a general insurance policy to cover perhaps other rental properties, you'll need to get another policy or add this rental property to your policy in order to get coverage. And that's a really crucial key, because you could be creating extra liability by you're renting to your child. Of course, you hope your child won't sue you, but potentially those other classmates, those other tenants, they could potentially sue you. And we need to make sure that there's insurance there to cover that. Of course, if you have a mortgage, they will require it, but it is worth noting that it is very important to make sure, again, you have adequate insurance. Another thing I'll note is fair market value rent is not optional. You can't just have your child pay you whatever rent that you think is reasonable. We need to make sure that you go out and you get comparable rental values from comparable properties, and that is the rental value. Again, so let's use the housing allowance example I went through earlier. If the fair market rental rate is $3,000 per month, but the financial aid office of the university says the housing allowance is $2,000 a month, you can't just put the rent at $2,000 a month. Why? Well, because the IRS can come in and say, one, they could say that, hey, maybe that was a partial gift. That's a little bit more complicated. It's an argument they could make. You can give up to, right now, as it stands here in 2026, $19,000 to one individual per calendar year. And if you're married, that can be $38,000. So ultimately, if you give $38,000 to your child and you're married, you won't even have to report that to the IRS. That is your gift tax exclusion amount. But if you give more than $38,000, then the amount over $38,000 will reduce your lifetime gift and estate tax exemption amount. But again, this is where these estate and gift tax implications can really come into play. If you're also not having the child pay fair market value rent, you are risking the disallowance of certain deductions, meaning you won't be able to potentially deduct all of the expenses associated with the property against the income of the property. There's a whole slew of things that can go wrong if you are paying under fair market value, or if you're having your child pay under fair market value rent to rent the home. Now, there's a lot of other traps to be aware of too with this strategy, such as personal use days, the occupancy structure, and economic substance. Again, the IRS is going to just look at the whole nature of the deal and figure out, hey, does this look and feel like an arm's length transaction or an arm's length deal? Meaning, again, is there fair market rental value? Are you actually treating this like a true landlord-tenant relationship? If rent is missed, are you charging those late fees? Do you actually have a lease that's signed by everybody, including your child? There needs to be economic substance to this particular situation. And again, if it doesn't have economic substance, or there's personal use days, maybe you're going and you're staying in the property too when you go visit your child, there's going to run into all kinds of problems with, again, disallowing certain deductions, and then again, some gift tax implications potentially. Now again, ownership structure is the real decision. I think anybody out there, any tax strategist out there can talk to you about using this strategy. I think it's conceptually very easy to understand, but I think where people fall short is, well, now what should I do from an estate and business and asset protection tax perspective? So just note that, again, if you're going to hold this rental property, perhaps there is a black mold or something in the property and insurance doesn't cover it, you are going to be personally liable for any liability arising from that. Typically, what we'll suggest that our clients do is have the rental held in an LLC. But if you don't maintain your LLC correctly and there's a lawsuit, the person suing the LLC will be able to pierce the corporate veil, or they'll be able to hold you personally liable for that lawsuit. So again, by having an LLC, you still have to maintain it correctly. That doesn't mean you're off the hook. If you have an LLC, we need to make sure the LLC itself is titled to your revocable trust. Because if it's not, then we're going to talk about probate and the court being involved if something were to happen to you. When we talk about tax strategies, we don't look at it from an overarching, comprehensive way. We have people out here talking about strategies. We're not talking about how this strategy affects other aspects of your life. Now, if the plan is to eventually give the property to a child or sell it or something like that, we need to talk about other aspects like property tax reassessment, because if you give a rental property to a child here in California, there's going to be a property tax reassessment event. Furthermore, if you sell it to the child, there's going to be capital gains taxes you're going to pay. If you're going to gift it to the child or sell it for under fair market value, that's a part gift, part sale. The transferring of that property really needs to be thought out beforehand as well. Is your goal, again, to keep this rental property for you, or maybe your child's going to stay put at that university and potentially live there, and maybe you'll transfer it to them later on? Well, what's the plan? Because we really need to come up with a well-rounded kind of game plan from the beginning, from a planning perspective. I never will tell a client you need an LLC for each and every property you own. But having said that, let's say you have a beach house in Santa Barbara. You have a very expensive beach home that's worth millions of dollars. Not really risky because it's a family beach house. You're not renting it out, no short-term rentals. And then you go ahead and you put your campus rental in that same LLC. If there's a liability event in that campus rental in the same LLC as the beach house, whoever is suing you is going to be able to come after that beach house very easily as well. So again, we don't want to mix high, risk assets with low risk assets that are exponentially different in value. I love the creativity out there and these strategies. Again, we use them for our clients, but this isn't really a 529 question. When we start to look and dive deeper into this strategy, we're going to find that a decision made from a tax strategy standpoint, as you can tell from this video, affects your asset protection, and any decisions you make from an asset protection perspective really do affect you from an estate planning perspective. When you're thinking about these strategies, again, you need to think about how it affects all of your documents and all of your planning components. And so if you have a tax strategist or you have an estate planning attorney, let's say you have a business attorney, you have 3, 4, 5 different people who are involved in your affairs, this is where things can slip through the cracks, because your tax strategist is saying one thing, your business attorney doesn't know about it, and if they do, they're probably saying a different thing. Your financial advisor is saying something completely different as well, and you're stuck in the middle trying to figure out what's right. And that's where things slip through the cracks, where people disagree and people aren't talking. So if you've liked this video, I hope you have found it very useful. You can go to our website, tqdlaw.com, and you can look at our blogs. We have a ton of blogs for you to look at. We have a ton of content on all aspects of asset protection, tax strategy, estate and succession planning, all the areas that we've discussed in this video. And then if you like what you hear too as well, feel free to set up a strategy session with me. That is a $750 fee. And we sit down for an hour and we go through all these different aspects I've talked about: taxes, asset protection, business law, estate and succession planning, everything. And we lay out a strategy and everything that needs to be done. And we have a money back guarantee. We say, hey, look, if you don't think you learned anything within a few days from that strategy session, just let us know. We'll give you your money back and no questions asked. Okay, we're that confident that you're going to leave with a strategy and be happy with it. If you do decide to hire us for flat fee matters, then we credit that $750 to the flat fee. And if you hire us for an hourly matter, then that $750 is paid and we just begin working an hourly matter. So most of the stuff that we practice law in here is on a flat fee basis though, so most of them we're crediting the $750 to the flat fee.